Hey, what's up, guys? Welcome to the channel. Since the latest Jon Jones arrest for domestic violence, people have asked me, what is your opinion on Jon Jones? Should the UFC cut him? What should they do with him if they don't cut him? And really, it's been a couple weeks since the incident. I've had some time to really think about it. I've given a little bit, of a preview of my opinion on some of the live streams that I've done, but I really wanted to make a comprehensive video on the way I feel about Jon Jones, my personal opinion, what I think the UFC should do with him, and really just kind of break down all the things that have gone on with Jon Jones throughout his career. And at this point, personally, I'm done with him. I just want to move on from him in MMA. I'm just tired of constantly having my hopes just dashed of fun fights that could happen in the future, never happening, and just constant legal trouble from him. And also, I want to talk about, and I think most people are interested in that, and I think you guys have an understanding of why, but we're going to talk about it anyway. Why does the UFC treat guys like Jon Jones and Conor McGregor differently from some of the other guys? We'll break that down a little bit. I think some of you guys already understand what goes on there. But I actually have to have some serious notes in front of me because I could not remember all the trouble that Jon Jones has been in. He's been stripped of the light heavyweight title 3 times. 2 times it was the undisputed title, 1 time it was the interim title. But let's briefly look at his career. So he had a decent win streak in the UFC. He beat Ryan Bader. And at this point, Mauricio Shogun Rua was the light heavyweight champion, and Rashad Evans was the #1 contender. And Rashad Evans was injured, I believe. He couldn't fight Shogun on the right time frame the UFC wanted. So the UFC gave Jon Jones the light heavyweight title shot. And Jon Jones went in there against Shogun Rua and absolutely wrecked him. Shogun tapped the strikes. I think technically it was ruled a TKO. But when he went down, he was tapping the strikes. And Jon Jones just looked so good. And after that, I mean, most of you guys know his career, but what a, resume of who's who. And I know a lot of these names are now older names, but at the time he beat them back in 2011, Rampage Jackson, Lyoto Machida, Rashad Evans. And I believe it was after the Rashad Evans fight was Jon Jones' first real legal trouble as UFC champion. He was arrested for a DUI. It was May 19th of 2012. I think he crashed his Bentley into a pole of some sort. He eventually was arrested, and I think he had to pay fines and have some stuff installed in his car. And this really wasn't talked about too much after this. I mean, it was kind of swept under the rug. The UFC didn't do nothing about it. Then he went on to fight Vitor Belfort, Chael Sonnen, Alexander Gustafsson, Glover Teixeira, Daniel Cormier at UFC 182. This was back in January of 2015. And after this fight, he tested positive for cocaine. And while it was the lead up to the fight where he tested positive for cocaine, but on fight night, they test him the day before, and I think right after the fight as well, there was no cocaine found in his system. So technically, he didn't break the rules, but it was released for some reason. I actually don't believe it even should be released. But Jon Jones, being, Jon Jones, checked himself into rehab, and he was there for 1 day. After the Daniel Cormier fight, he was supposed to fight Rumble Johnson. And this is one of the fights that really absolutely devastated me because he was supposed to fight Rumble Johnson in April of 2015, and I was really looking forward to this fight. Jon Jones versus Anthony Rumble Johnson. Rumble looked like an absolute killer at this point. The knockout power was unbelievable. For me, at that point in time, it was the most excited I'd ever been for a matchup. Jon Jones versus Rumble Johnson. And unfortunately, it didn't happen because Jon Jones got into a car accident. He crashed into a pregnant woman. She broke her arm. He fled the scene of the crime. And I have my own theory about that. I believe Jon Jones was drunk, and I believe he'd rather take the hit and run charge rather than another DUI, DWI. So that's why he ran from that situation. Now, after that whole situation, he was stripped of the belt. He no longer had the light heavyweight title, and he was suspended, I think, for like 6 months or something like that. And when he finally returned after that, he was supposed to fight Daniel Cormier for the belt again. But Daniel Cormier pulled out of the fight with an injury. This was at UFC 197, April of 2016. DC pulled out of the fight, had some type of injury, and Ovince St. Preux stepped in, and Jon Jones fought Ovince St. Preux for the interim light heavyweight title. Jon Jones beat OSP. It was a terrible fight, honestly. I don't know if Jon was just caught off guard because it was a short notice opponent. We know he doesn't like short notice opponents, but it just wasn't a spectacular performance. And after the win over OSP, he was supposed to fight DC again. And this fight I was really looking forward to. DC had looked really good. DC was still the undisputed champion because in the meantime, he had fought Anthony Rumble and won the belt. And then I think he defended against Gustafsson at this point in time. And we were going to get interim champion Jon Jones versus Daniel Cormier at UFC 200. And I don't think a fight cancellation ever hit me as hard because this was so close to the fight. The week of the fight, Jon Jones tests positive for some type of PED. He cries at a press conference, says he doesn't know how it got into his system. And I'm a guy who is always willing to give second chances. And I don't want to make excuses for guys, but I can say, you know what, they made a mistake, whatever. And I kind of always did that for Jon Jones, But again, tests positive, pulls out of the fight. So he goes on to then finally fight Daniel Cormier a year later. I think he got a year suspension or something like that from USADA. He wasn't able to, be suspended for the full length of time because he did some cooperation deal. And he finally fights Daniel Cormier at UFC 214. And Jon Jones came into that fight and looked like an absolute savage. He finishes DC in the third round, head kick to elbows. One of the most brutal finishes of a guy in DC who was taking punches off Rumble Johnson. To finish DC like that, Jon Jones wins back the title after being stripped of the interim light heavyweight title before for testing positive. And what a spectacular performance. And we thought Jon Jones is back. Well, nope. Jon Jones tests positive for another PED and is then stripped of the belt, and the belt is given back to DC. Well, finally, another year or so later, he fights Alexander Gustafsson, UFC 232, and now it's for the vacant belt. DC had gone up at this point, captured the heavyweight belt, and vacated the light heavyweight belt. So they finally did the Jon Jones-Alexander Gustafsson rematch, and people had been crying for this fight for years. We finally got them rematching, and Jon takes care of Gustafsson. Special win. A lot of people thought it was going to be super competitive when you look at the first fight between the two. And he just absolutely, it was a close fight up until it wasn't. When Jon Jones got Gustafsson down, he treated him like an absolute baby. Finishes him TKO third round. And it's okay, Jon Jones is back again. Then he goes on to fight Anthony Smith. The fight was a dominant decision. He illegally knees Anthony Smith. Anthony Smith continues. He won all 5 rounds, but it was nothing spectacular. Then he goes on to fight Thiago Santos. Close fight. A lot of people thought Santos won. I thought John's just barely won it, but I could have seen it going either way. And then most recently, he fights Dominic Cruz last February. Very close fight. A lot of people have it for Dominic Reyes, but it was a very close fight. Could have won either way, in my opinion. And, when you really look back, and in between all that stuff that just went on there, you have so many incidents. He was arrested. I already talked about the hit and run. He was arrested on July 21st, 2019 for allegedly assaulting a waitress of some sort, and he ended up settling with no contest. He was arrested in March of 2020. I literally have to pull up the notes because there's been so many incidents, I can't even remember them all. He was arrested in March of 2020. He had an illegal firearm on him or something like that while he was drunk, driving. It's just constant problems for Jon Jones. Well, now let's talk about the most recent incident, which was September of this year, and he was arrested for a domestic violence dispute with his wife. He was in Las Vegas. The fight with him and Gustafsson was being inducted into the UFC Hall of Fame, and of course, Jon Jones goes out that night and gets into some trouble. And there's some disturbing details regarding the situation. But I'm a person that always says innocent until proven guilty. Unless we really have some concrete video of something, I'm always kind of, a little bit leery to start crucifying a guy before we see something. But the police report is pretty damning. Supposedly his wife had a bloody lip. Apparently, she said, he only pulled her hair. Apparently, he headbutted a police vehicle and left a dent in it. And apparently his kid was asking one of the valets or something like that, or a hotel worker, please call the cops. And it just doesn't look good. I mean, when the cops show up, you're drunk and belligerent, and your wife is bloody. You know what I mean? What does that look like? If Jon Jones is found out to that he was assaulting his wife in his hotel room, drunk or not, Jon Jones deserves to not work for the UFC anymore. And to be honest, Bellator may pick him up, or one of these other organizations may pick him up, but I don't think he deserves to be picked up. I don't think anyone should be in the Jon Jones business. Now, there could be some other details to this. Maybe it was just like a little, maybe not him directly, attacking anyone, maybe a little bit of shoving or something like that. But either way, for me, regardless of the circumstances, Jon Jones just has a history of getting into trouble again and again and again. It never ends. He's constantly in trouble. He's constantly drinking, and he's constantly saying it's a new me every time. I mean, if this was any other fighter, well, okay, let me actually fix that. If this was 95% of the other fighters on the roster, they would have been cut a million years ago. A million years ago. But to getting to the fact of why Jon Jones and guys like Conor McGregor has a checker history as well. Not as long as Jon Jones, but it's getting there. It's getting there between punching old men in bars, breaking people's cell phones, assaulting a DJ that came out recently. Uh, and even when he threw the dolly in the bus, there was people cut, and they couldn't continue to fight on the UFC card, and there was really no punishment. And the UFC, you know, we know why this is going on because Conor McGregor, Jon Jones, and guys like in the same category as them, they draw money to the UFC. They draw more money than the UFC is willing to part with over some legal issues. If you notice what happens every time, a big star from the UFC gets in legal trouble, it's always like Dana White's always saying and the UFC's always saying, we are going to wait for the legal system to play out. And I would be fine with that response if it was consistent across the board. I think, it should apply to every fighter, whether it's this low level fighter or not. Luis Pena was recently cut from the roster. Violent Bob Ross, there were some allegations against him. But because he doesn't generate any money, he may very well be guilty. But I think the UFC should wait for the legal process to play out. If they want to play this card, wait for the legal process to play out. And if they're found guilty, then cut them. If you're like, okay, I'm cutting you now. But what most other organizations like the NFL do, they hear about these incidents, they hire their own investigators to go investigate, and they say, okay, you violated our, personal conduct policy, and you get reprimanded, whether it be a fine, a suspension, whatever. There's guys who are stars in the NFL who are top tier, wide receivers and quarterbacks, and they get in legal trouble like this, and their careers are ruined. They are cut from the NFL. Nobody picks them up, and it's the end of it. And at some point, you got to get there with Jon Jones. I mean, how many times, is he going to be in some type of incident? I mean, he's eventually going to kill someone drinking and driving, it seems, at this point. He just never stops drinking and never stops getting in trouble and making bad decisions. And I feel like across the board, the UFC should have a consistent policy that they use on all fighters, regardless of their star power or their money generating fights. It should be applied the same to all. If you want to wait for the legal process to play out for Jon Jones, you should wait for the legal process to, play out for lesser known fighters. Now, if you want to, you should also have some type of rule book where if XYZ happens, you're fined. If XYZ happens, you're suspended for a certain amount of time. The UFC in the past has played with suspensions with Jon Jones, but they're really meaningless. A 6-month suspension in MMA means absolutely nothing. Half the time these guys only fight once or twice a year anyway. So even twice a year, that's once every 6 months. So a 6-month suspension is really what? Now, what I really think should happen with Jon Jones at this point, I'd struggle to say that he should be cut, but we need to find out more details of the alleged incident, and the UFC needs to do something. They need to do something. I'm so sick and tired of these fake, just because a guy generates money. Well, we're waiting for the legal system to play out. you guys should do something regardless, even if, it's found it wasn't that bad and, he was just drunk and maybe there was some pushing and shoving or something like that. I think the UFC should still be fining this guy. I think they should be taking money out of his pocket. But then again, you get into a whole nother conversation because Jon Jones is technically an independent contractor. So I don't know if they can really, invoke that type of stuff just because of the situation. Technically, Jones is not an employee. But honestly, me personally, I said it before, I'm just done with Jon Jones. I'm just disappointed. I've been looking forward to fight after fight after fight, and he's just let me down throughout his entire career. I mean, I was so excited for that Anthony Rumble Johnson matchup. I was so excited for that DC fight at UFC 200. I was really looking forward to a potential Jon Jones versus Francis Ngannou. Do you guys know how incredible that would have been? And this guy is just constantly in trouble. He's wasted countless years of his fighting prime getting in trouble, doing the stupidest stuff you can possibly imagine. Uh, and flat out, if it comes out that he actually assaulted his wife, he needs to be cut from the organization, and nobody else needs to pick him up. If Bellator picks him up, the media needs to constantly go after him. And also, I hope if he's found to have assaulted his wife, I hope the legal system does play out and throw him in jail. But I don't. I really, honestly, if I had to give my prediction, what I think happens is nothing probably comes of these charges. Maybe some probation or something like that for damaging the police vehicle. The UFC eventually has Jon Jones fighting middle of next year to late next year, and then maybe another year or two from then we repeat the same process because it's just going to keep happening over and over and over again. We've seen it with these guys. It's their personality. I'm sure you guys know people in life like this. They're just constantly in trouble and it's never their fault. And it's funny, the other detail that I've yet to mention is Jackson Wink Jim said, Jon Jones, don't come back. We don't want you here anymore because he's just constantly in trouble. And at this point, he's not generating them much money. Those gyms get a cut of his purse, and he's not fighting. He hasn't fought since he fought Dominic Reyes. He's probably not fighting till next year. So I don't know if Jon Jones ever goes back to that gym, but this whole entire story just really depresses me because Jon Jones is one of my favorite fighters to watch. He has one of the highest fight IQs I've ever seen. He's one of the most well rounded guys I've ever seen. And he has such a unique skill set that you really don't see in any other fighter. And I would have loved to seen him in some of these matchups. And I was really looking forward to seeing him at heavyweight. But at this point, I'm just done. He's disappointed me too many times. And, it's just never going to end. I've just accepted the fact that Jon Jones will be in trouble till the day he dies. And maybe one day this is going to catch up to him. Maybe one day he's going to crash his car. He's going to be drunk, and it's going to be him. He's going to be the victim at this point or whatever. He's gonna have something bad happen to him, whether he hurts himself or kills himself or whatever. It's just people like this never seem to change. I remember DC saying in an interview years ago, Jon Jones will always be the same guy. He's going to sit there and pretend like he's getting better or he's making adjustments into his life. But what he's doing is he's just secretly hiding, what he's doing and maybe not getting caught. Because also there was one last thing I wanted to mention. I just popped into my head. Dana White said something very telling, and I don't know if it was just a mistake by him, but he said every time Jon Jones comes to Vegas, he gets in trouble. What I found funny about that is I don't remember any of these legal issues. They all seem to happen in Albuquerque, New Mexico, not in Las Vegas. So I wonder how many incidents did we not hear about that the UFC kind of swept under the rug or we didn't hear about? And also, I totally forgot to mention the fact that Jon Jones, and according to the experts that are working for the UFC, the pulsing is normal. Jon Jones, they had to move a whole event from Las Vegas because Jon Jones was still testing positive when he in the lead up to Alexander Gustafsson too. So they moved the whole entire card to California because of him pulsing with PEDs in his system because supposed prior use. So there's just so many things to digest, so many disappointments of fights we're never going to see. And, I think that's pretty much my entire opinion. Guys, if you enjoyed this video, make sure to like it. I really appreciate it. I tried to go through everything, the whole entire history of Jon Jones. There's so much, I might have missed something. So let me know in the comments what you guys think. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you in the next video.